Hello everybody, Spartan Robot Guy here, and today I just want to talk about my top 10 boss battles in Banjo-Tooie. I gotta be honest, the last few weeks I've been on a bit of a banjo kick. I have no idea why. They are games I pick up and play every year or so. Every year or so I'll pick up and just play them again. But something about this particular playthrough of Banjo-Tooie has really reminded me just why I love these games. You know, the originality, the humor, the personality. I can't think of another game series with quite as much personality as the first two Banjo games. To me, Banjo-Tooie in particular is quite memorable for its boss battles. You know, they're very distinct, they're very unique, and in my opinion, I don't think another game, with the exception of maybe the Metroid games, has such a unique plethora of bosses. Now, that being said, some are definitely better than others. Some boss encounters have definitely aged quite well, some have not. So in this video, I am going to rank the boss battles in Banjo-Tooie from best to worst. Now, this video is my opinion, and if you disagree, awesome. You know, I welcome conversations in the comments. I welcome people to open up how they feel about certain boss encounters. At the end of the day, this is my personal opinion, and that is very subjective, so feel free to interrupt. Feel free to disagree. That is 100% your right. Anyway, let's get started. Number 10. My least favorite boss encounter in Banjo-Tooie has got to be Lord Woo-Fack-Fack. And it's not really hard to see why, in my opinion. For starters, it, for lack of a better term, just feels tedious. It's a very tedious encounter. For starters, it's a very small, very confined space in which you're battling this enormous fish. And frankly, there's just not enough room to maneuver. I find myself taking damage just because there's so little room to maneuver, and all of a sudden the big fish is on me, and I'm taking damage just for swimming into his teeth. Not only that, but the hit detection feels off. It feels like I'm hitting these targets dead bang on the money, but I'm not taking damage. Seems like I not only have to hit them, but I have to hit them at a very particular angle, and for lack of a better term, it just feels unfair sometimes. I remember the first time I beat this boss, I spent almost an hour just swimming back and forth trying to hit this boss, and I was about ready to scream and throw my controller. And even today, it's one of the only bosses in the game I genuinely dread. It's like, okay, I need the extra jiggy, let's get this over with and obliterate this bloody fish. Just a quick sidebar, it is a bit comical. I remember as a kid, I used to pronounce the name with the U sound instead of an A sound because I thought I can get away with saying the F word in that fashion. But suffice it to say, it didn't quite work. Anyway, my least favorite boss in the game is Lord Woo-Fack-Fack. He gets the spot as number 10. Number 9, Old King Cole. I gotta be honest, I feel like I'm gonna get some flack for this one. Don't get me wrong, the character design and the actual battle is fine. To me, it's more of just how tedious it can be sometimes. You know, it feels very inconsistent where you can and can't stand to take damage or to continue to suffocate. And half the time, I'm just jumping around trying to find a spot where I can recover my air bubbles to continue attacking. In terms of actually fighting him, usually what I do is I just spray him with eggs until his hit points hit 0. As a matter of fact, I've often made a point to get all the way to getting ice eggs before I actually battle him because that makes it so much easier, but I digress. Another thing, and it's more minor in my opinion, but it just feels a little random. Just all of a sudden you're in a mine and you're battling a big pile of coal. Now that I say that out loud, it doesn't feel as random. But the vibe I get is honestly that they didn't know what else to do, and they felt like they needed a boss battle in Glitter Gulch Mine. So here, let's battle a coal monster. Just to me, there's not as much originality as with a lot of the other bosses. So again, the battle itself is more than a little tedious, and to me, it's not quite as tedious as Lord Woo-Fack-Fack, so I'll put it at number 9 instead of number 10. Number 8. Terry of Terrydactyland. I gotta be honest, this one was a bit of a hard one for me. The battle itself I never had issue with. I remember enjoying it an awful lot as a kid, but looking at it today as a cynical adult, it's just not all that inspired. It's, to me, one of the most unoriginal boss battles in the game. Now, don't get me wrong, the boss design itself is fantastic. It's one of my favorite designs in the game. But at the same time, all you gotta do is just dodge and shoot. You know, number 10 and 9 I put in their spots for being tedious, but for number 8, for Terry, there just isn't much to say. And to me, especially in a banjo game, that's the worst thing you can have is not much to say. I mean, literally, You dodge his attacks, you take out a couple of enemies, and then you have a short window to shoot at him with eggs. That's literally all there is to say. And once again, that's the worst thing you can have in a Banjo game, is an enemy that isn't all that original. These games thrive on originality. So having such a bland actual battle, to me, really hurts the overall appeal of the boss battle. I will say the side quest afterwards, where you track down his eggs, is kind of fun. That was one that I found myself enjoying a lot as a kid. But the battle itself, there's just not much to say. And again, I can't think of a worse thing to say about a Banjo boss than not much to say. So Terry takes the number 8 spot, for good or ill. Number 7, I am going to collectively bundle the 3 Kungo battles into one, just in the interest of consistency and time. I gotta be honest, I have nothing against these encounters, but to me they just don't feel necessary. They're not difficult enough to represent a substantial challenge, and frankly, they feel more like padding than anything. The one exception being the first time you encounter him. I feel like that was a very good introduction. That was a very good refresher, just to make sure you're good enough with the base moveset to be able to advance without much trouble. But other than that, the other two just don't feel necessary. It feels like they're trying to pad out the runtime of the game. They're not particularly difficult either, and honestly, I get the vibe that they weren't originally meant for the second game. I don't know this for certain, but it almost seems like this was a concept that was planned for the first game, but for whatever reason, time constraints, budgetary restrictions, etc., they chose to leave it on the cutting room floor. Again, these are not hard battles, they just don't feel all that necessary, so they're a little higher on the list at number 7. Coming in at number 6, we have Mr. Patch. Not gonna lie, there's a ton of parallels between Mr. Patch and Lord Woofakfak. But I gotta be honest, between the two, Mr. Patch to me is just a lot more fun. To state the obvious, you actually have room to maneuver. You're not constantly up in the boss's face. You're not constantly just taking pot shots. You have the time to time it out and angle your shots in such a way where it feels a lot more tactical. The hitboxes are a lot bigger and easier to hit. You know, I absolutely love the design of this particular boss. It's very original. And honestly, the aerial twist to me just lends a lot more fun to it. It's a lot more fun to, soar around inside this gigantic big top versus constantly trying to swim around this huge fish that's in your face. All things considered, this is what Lord Woofakfak should have been. I feel like Lord Woofakfak would have been a lot more fun if you had a little more room to maneuver. Something as simple as the size of the arena can make all of the difference. More on that later. In the interest of consistency, once again, I will bundle the 2 Chili Bro Dragons into number 5. I gotta be honest, I absolutely love this particular battle. It's a great sequence of events between the cannons and the dodging the tongues. The designs of the dragons are really cool, and the overall concept is just a lot of fun. It's very hard to find flaws with these particular battles. I also particularly enjoy the sequence of actually accessing them, where you have to wait for them to destroy different parts of the scenery to be able to actually access the boss battles themselves, to be able to get to the top of their respective mountains. Really cool sequence there. My only serious flaw is that these boss battles feel a little too similar. Now, I know that that's kind of the idea. They're supposed to be twin brothers, one is fire, one is ice, and that's a cool idea. But at the same time, it's hard to rectify the fact that it's basically the same battle done twice. And for me personally, it might be a little different if you got multiple jiggies. But at the same time, doing the same battle twice to me, again, just feels like padding. It feels like they're trying to make this battle feel a little longer than it actually is. Number 4 was one case I had a lot of trouble deciding where to put this particular boss, because it is one of my personal favorites. But number 4 is Target-san. And the big reason he found his way into number 4 isn't necessarily against Target-san himself, because it is an awesome boss encounter, but it's just a perspective on how fantastic these bosses are, where I had trouble deciding the top 3 in particular. At the end of the day, somebody needed to be number 4, and unfortunately, in my opinion, that is Target-san. The design is fantastic, the sheer originality on display is mind-blowing, it's a fantastic introduction to the first-person shooter gameplay, and again, I have very little ill to say about it. I will say it's a little easy, but it's also the first boss in the game, the first proper boss of the game, so at the same time that almost feels necessary. But still, the sheer originality, the sheer amount of detail that went into it, just everything about this boss battle is absolutely fantastic. And I wish I could put it higher on the list, but there are some bosses in the game that are just so much better. So Target Sand is at number 4. For number 3, again, I had a lot of trouble picking my top 3 and 4 and 5 in particular, but number 3 has got to go to Mumbo Jumbo. You know, Cloud Cuckoo Land is already an acid trip of a level as it is, so in a very bizarre, very out there way, having a cybernetic Mumbo Jumbo almost feels natural. But the actual battle itself is really intense. It's a relatively small space, but unlike Lord Woofak, there's actually enough room to maneuver where you could do what you gotta do. And again, the sheer surprise, the sheer twist that this isn't actually Mumbo, again, it's just the icing on the cake. It's such an offbeat, such a ridiculous, and such a particularly intense battle that to me, it just has to be somewhere high on the list, or low on the list, depending on how you look at it. There's really no way to approach this without calling it an absolute definitive classic N64 moment. I still remember my shock the first time I entered that particular Mumbo hut and was surprised to see him jump up and shock me. It's like, oh crap, it's the Terminator. Except it's Mumbo Jumbo, it's the Mumbo-nator. It was just so off-kilter, and it fits with the vibe Banjo-Kazooie is going for so perfectly. I can't help but put it at number 3. Number 2 for me has got to go to Hag 1, the final battle in the game. To me, what makes this battle in particular so memorable is that, more so than honestly any game I think I've ever played, this feels like a true final confrontation. This feels like a great dramatic final battle between good and evil. You know, it feels like you have to pull out every stop. You have to remember every skill you picked up playing the game. At some point or another, most components of the moveset come into play. It feels like a genuine culmination of everything you've done in the game all coming together for one dramatic encounter. It's also a very intense test of skill. I remember the first time I ever got to this part, I was actually spending the night at a friend's house, and for about 4 hours straight, we just took turns trying to take down Hag 1. And I remember each time we got a little bit closer, but finally we both gave up and had to go to bed. So again, more so than any final battle I think I've ever played, with the exception of maybe Ravenbeak and Metroid Dread, this feels like a culmination of everything in the game all coming together for one great dramatic send-off. And by process of elimination, you probably already know this, but my number 1 boss will always be Welder. Or Weldar, I never quite figured out what the pronunciation was. Anyway, to me, Welder is the ultimate culmination of everything a great banjo boss should be. It's tricky, but not so tricky that it feels tedious. There's a really fun sequence to bringing him down. It's very satisfying when you finally do. Just everything about this boss represents the best parts of Banjo-Kazooie, represents the best parts of the Banjo games. I remember the first time I ever got to this boss, first of all, it took me a full week of trial and error to be able to actually access him. And I absolutely love the race against time you got to do within Grunty Industries just to get into that particular room. But then I spent over a week just trying to bring him down. And when I finally did, I was on top of the flippin' world. I would say more so than any boss I remember growing up, this was one that I felt genuinely accomplished for bringing down. Even more so than Hag 1, bringing down Welder on my own was an accomplishment. I felt like an absolute god of gaming when I finally did. So, all things considered, Welder is my favorite boss just because it is, once again, just everything a great banjo boss should be, all in one room. So, there you have it. My picks for the best boss battles in Banjo-Tooie, and also the worst. To me, it's a perspective on just how memorable and how classic these games are that even 25, almost 30 years later, we're still talking about them in such high esteem. As far as I'm concerned, these are games that will truly never die, and these boss battles are just one of many reasons as to why. Maybe in my next video I'll talk about my favorite mini-games between the two. Maybe there's just so many other things you could list about these games. It's one of the things that makes them so special. For now, let me know what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Feel free to hop in my comment section and put in your 2 cents. As always, I kindly ask that we keep it respectful. We're all gamers here. We're all cut from the same cloth, so to speak. So I hope everybody has a great day, and I hope you enjoyed my thoughts and nostalgia.